particular subject, what you're effectively doing is you're taking in this kind of unorganized, chaotic mass of information that's just being brought in from the world, and you have to essentially make some kind of sense of it and summarize it and be able to express some kind of narrative from it effectively in speech and writing. And if you think about that, that's actually the skills that you use. That is the set of skills you use for most any kind of interesting work in the world later on. You know, if you're not doing a particular sort of challenge in any kind of management or sort of business perspective, those are the sorts of skills that one uses. And I think to generalize that, there was something I read as a freshman here. Does anyone take ESF in this room? Okay, we got 2 people? Okay, we got 2 people. So I took ESF freshman fall, and we read something by, his name is Cardinal John Henry Newman. Now this is real history here going from the 19th century. He ran Oxford at that time. And essentially what he wrote about was this concept of the university as sort of like a gym for the mind. Like in the sense that you're not actually developing any discrete particular skills, but you're developing your capacity to think, your capacity to learn, right? And so you do it at that stage, and then later on you know flesh it out in real life context. But I think on campus, that's not often the view that's taken. People look about what can you get from the work you're doing right now, right? And so as of now, quantitative pursuits, engineering are elevated quite a bit in this sort of context, and there are many solid reasons for that. There's a stronger job market, especially coming right out of college. Now that's not necessarily the case years down the road, but in terms of the original, that is the reality. And especially given our context here in Silicon Valley, I mean, this is the center of kind of the tech world, and so it's very promising, and you basically have recruiters, you know, lining up saying, please let me give you an engineering job. And so, and it's a perfectly noble pursuit. It's just, I think it's important to note that it's not for everyone, and there are actually other routes. I think there are some circumstances in which perhaps humanities departments on campus don't always help themselves in this sort of field, which I think is another reason why this is less common. I found that some of the introductory courses, in many cases, I think they try to become accessible to people, and the challenge of it is that they're actually not particularly rigorous in many respects, and that actually lends credence to the view that is espoused quite often in critique of these sorts of fields that they're not actually that rigorous, because in fact if you take the intro courses, they are not always as rigorous as a comparable kind of STEM course. And then, but I don't think that's the full picture. I think that at the same time there's perhaps a certain culture which is propping up these sort of quantitative STEM fields like more than what people's actual interests are in them. A few interesting kind of notes. When I started here as a freshman, like 3-4 years ago, the share of students who were studying computer science was actually only half what it is today. And it's doubled over the past 3 years. And over the past 6 years, it's gone up 3 times. Now, over the past 6 years, the market for software engineering, things like that, has certainly grown, but it's not tripled. And so there's definitely a sort of cultural component to that. And I personally know many people who have been, let's say, exceptionally gifted in physics or in literature or in economics or whatever it is, and feel some sort of impetus to go into a more sort of engineering sort of track. And I think they found in some respects that they've maybe been sort of middle of the road in that kind of world. And perhaps that's not the right decision, perhaps it is the right decision, perhaps it's not. But I think sometimes the social pressure pushes people in that kind of direction. Now for me though, as a history kind of student at the beginning of my time here, I was not even fully convinced of that because of that sort of cultural pressure, and I think it took going abroad and going to, I studied abroad at Oxford my junior fall, and there, the most exalted major is classics, right? And everyone looks up to the classics, they're geniuses, right? And everyone there is basically convinced that, almost everyone studies humanities there, and they're pretty much convinced they're going to lead successful, productive lives. And so I think being able to step out of this sort of context and see that there's a world beyond Stanford, Silicon Valley, tech companies, and there are other things that one can do in the world, I think provides a valuable perspective, which is not to say in any respect that these are, that the sorts of tech companies, things here are not worth pursuing. They very much are. But I think it's worth expanding that view and seeing the rest of the world in addition to that. Thank you.
Alrighty, next up we have Sophia with a talk entitled The future is Technicolor, a career in illustrating cadavers. Welcome, Sophie.
So before I start, I have a final version of my RBA here. I'm going to give a copy to everybody. Just kidding. Please pass around the pieces of paper. And just these pencils just thrown out. So I'll start. That title was so that Vinny could say the word cadaver, and he didn't even end up saying it. I'm disappointed.
Vinny, say it.
Cadaver!
Yes! Alright, he's very proud. Alright, who started the show Grey's Anatomy? Who knows the book, Grey's Anatomy? Yeah, that's what I thought. Who knows who wrote Grey's Anatomy? Who knows who illustrated Grey's Anatomy? Because if you've opened a book called Grey's Anatomy, which has been called the Bible of Anatomy, you would see that the illustrations that are there are of the human body, and they are gorgeous. They are beautiful. I would never say that dead people are beautiful, but they are gorgeous. Because when you look at the muscles, when you look at the body, when you look at your skeletal structure and everything that's in you, it is incredible. The man who illustrated Grey's Anatomy, Henry Van Dyke Carver, actually collaborated with a guy named Henry Gray to create Grey's Anatomy in 1958. That very book is still used today in medical schools all over the country and all over the world. Now, I just took my first medical illustration class. Soraya can tell you it's called Surge 240, 3242, 243? Whatever. But it's really, really cool. And I never thought I would say this before now, but I guess I saw that dead people were beautiful. And now I can say I love dead people, and my mom wonders why I don't have a boyfriend. The reason why that I say this is because not only is it super intricate, but it also applies to almost every single aspect of life. When you look at something, it was kind of funny, first day of class our teacher pulls out a foot, and half the people are like, ugh, and then half of the people are like, that's really cool. When you pull out a foot, you can see the muscles coming into it, and you can see all the overlapping parts and pieces. It's like opening a car and seeing how everything is sort of fitting together. It's really intricate and gorgeous. But what you really get from medical illustration, which is just illustrating the body, is a sense of, God, I have a word right in my head, is the sense of perception and a sense of observation. Does anybody know the name Joseph Bell? Joseph Bell is the man that Sherlock Holmes was based off of. He was a doctor. And what he would do is when the patient came into the room, he would use all of his senses to look at him. And often he could diagnose the patient without the patient saying a word. This is the culture that medical illustration tries to bring about. In a world where there's a bunch of tests and radiologists and x-rays that can really just sort of say what's wrong with you, you have to we've really lost the art of looking at someone and seeing what's wrong. And a lot of the time, it can actually save doctors a bunch of time and effort and money, because it is expensive to run x-rays and tests and blood tests. It's a lot. So what we're going to do really, really quickly is we're going to do a very quick exercise to develop our own powers of observation. So I want you to take the really most difficult part of medical illustration ever, which is drawing a hand. And what you're going to do is, it's actually really helpful in life, because what you do is you break things down and then you build them back up. So you can draw your hand, you can draw your neighbor's hand, it's fine. So what you do is you look and you see what are the basic shapes that are happening here. I know it's really, really weird and it sounds stupid and silly, I know, but I promise to make it fast. So it's a square. Your hand is a square. It's like a shovel shape. So square, and then where all your fingers would be, those are other squares. And then all of your fingers are more little squares, and just little rectangles right there. And then, you can see the rounded bits. Your fingertips are just squares with the corners cut off. And you break it down and build it back up. It's really, really cool because you can sort of apply it to, the rest of life, like in engineering. You can see something, and you can visually see, almost in a 3D rotation in your head, what something looks like and how you can break it down and build it back up. So if you just make a square, right here, the palm is a square, and your fingertips are a square. And once you've done this enough times, once you've drawn these enough times, you can see that things have a pattern. Like all of your fingers up here are evenly spaced. Or like the little webbing between your fingers. Those aren't, at the same height. One's lower, one's higher, one's lower. Or you notice proportions. It's really, really, really cool. So once you've got that down, basically how to become a medical illustrator is you just do that exact same thing that you've just done, and then do it a billion more times until you've memorized what exactly a hand looks like. Then when you see a weird hand, you know what's wrong, or you can see, why does it look like that? For example, usually people's fingers, they have little dips between the joints because that's where the muscles are. They're usually, pretty thin, and they just dip in between. My mom's hands are extremely square. She does a lot of handwork. She's an artist as well. So that's why her muscles are stronger. My hands, they curve out. And this happens all the time. You can determine weird things that are happening in other people's bodies as well as yours. Girls have wider hips. Girls have softer stomachs. Boys have bigger chests. It just happens. In any case,